What's going on, guys? Magdowan here. A few days ago, I saw this video by a gentleman called All Trades Jack. I had not seen the channel before, and the video is titled I Followed a Guide and It Changed My Life, Episode 5, New Player versus Path of Exile. And I watched, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 minutes of it. It's a 12-minute video, so I don't know, a third of it or so. And I just kept pausing it and thinking, you know what, I've got something to say. I've got thoughts about this. A lot of the things that he was saying were, I thought, very insightful and surprising. And it's one of those rare occasions where all three of my passions come together. I love video games, I love academic pedagogy, and I also teach guitar. And in this case, he has a lot to say that I think is informative about the way that we view Path of Exile and the way, as content creators, we go about trying to teach people how to approach the game. And a lot of the things that he says I think are rather stunning. And so, contrary to the typical, content wheel of this channel, I thought that in this case, a standard reaction type video was appropriate. And so we're going to take a look at this, and I'm going to share my thoughts, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know if I'm going to leave the entire thing in the video or if I'm going to edit it up and chop parts out. I'll, of course, leave a link to the original video in the description, but let's just see how it goes.
If you're thinking of playing Path of Exile, follow a guide. Sorry, forgot to start with an intro. Quick, roll the intro clip. Hey, new guy! Aw, don't you look all sweet and innocent, untainted by the sweaty, rage-inducing, seasonal grindfest that is Path of Exile. I'm so glad you're thinking of joining our
I need to learn
community.
some of
Now,
these
before you
editing
start playing the
tricks.
game with us, let me ask you a question so I can better guide you into playing the right way. Question 1 of 1. Do you want to play Path of Exile Hardcore Blind Death Metal Rage Mode? Or do you want to play Path of Exile Character Building Simulator? What's the difference? Let me tell you. My name is All Trades Jack, and if you've watched any of my other 4 POE videos, you know that I was a Path of Exile casual player who enjoyed the game without following a guide or looking up builds or basically understanding the game. I tried to learn all the mechanics and character building using the tools available to me within the game, which isn't that much. I'm a lot older now. The past year has aged me and my mind has expanded to understand the true greatness of the sheer amount of content that Path of Exile has to offer. But the only reason I'm able to stand here today and tell you my story as a Path of Exile player is because of a life-changing event I call following a guide. In this video, I plan on helping any new and casual players like myself understand that it's okay to start playing PoE with a build guide. There is so much more to.
So here was the first thing that caught my attention, is this idea that some people might not think it's okay to use a guide when approaching a video game. And I started to think about that, and I realized that maybe I am in the minority as compared to the general populace, in the sense that just about anything that I do in life, whether it's playing guitar or trying to, read a piece of literature and analyze it, or just playing a video game, literally the first thing that I do is try and seek out the accompanying community or academic discourse that surrounds it so that I can go into it with all the knowledge that is available. And I think that I may have sort of become out of touch with the idea that for a lot of people, the enjoyment of video games actually comes from the position of lacking knowledge and then discovering it organically through gameplay. And as All Trades Jack is pointing out here, Path of Exile, I would say it not only does it, not promote the idea that you should approach the game with no knowledge, but it actively punishes you for doing so. And maybe this is more of a problem than I was thinking it was initially. And so let's see what else he's got to say here.
To learn, and following a guide is basically the only way to play the game with the foundational knowledge required to succeed. There are 2 games called Path of Exile. One game you play before you look up a guide, and one you play while following a guide. They are so different, it really could be called Path of Exile 1 and 2. And
And I want to also point out it's an interesting binary that he sets up here between, there's only two ways. There's nothing in between. You are either going to have a terrible time if you're not following a guide, or you're playing the real game if you do follow a guide. And so let's try and keep in mind as we analyze the rest of the video, does this binary actually stand up? Is this accurate? Or is there a reasonable middle ground that a new player could find where they're engaging with some informational content, but for the most part, getting into the game as, the uninitiated, the unknowledgeable?
And the new one coming out sometime in the future should be number 3. Honestly, I can't decide which game I like better. Playing Path of Exile without a guide is kind of freeing. It has this open feeling of possibility and a constant state of learn, adapt, and overcome. But the problem comes with the frustration of constantly hitting that progression wall. You will learn, eventually, but eventually is a really long time. And getting to new popular content is entirely dependent on you getting to that eventuality. It took me roughly 300 hours and 5 characters to get to tier 6 or yellow maps.
Now, this is where, so I guess I lied at the beginning. I actually only watched maybe 2 minutes of the video, 2.5 minutes here. This is where I paused it and I said, all right, I've got to make a video about this. So he says it took him 300 hours to get to yellow tier maps. And initially my reaction was that that's ridiculous. There's no way that it could. 300 hours that's a huge amount of time. And in my personal experience, I did not take 300 hours to get to maps on any character that I've ever made. That's not a thing that has ever happened to me. I don't even think it ever took 100 hours. And so I had this sort of, I guess I was almost a little bit judgmental when I heard him say that initially. And I wanted, you're bad, or, those types of thoughts. And then, quickly I realized, okay, that's a little bit toxic. Let's see what he has to say about it. And let's try and put ourselves into the mindset of someone who, in my case, somebody who's not going into the game initially, as a trained researcher. And is it reasonable to expect that if somebody just picks the game up fresh and they don't have a guide, that they're looking at a 300-hour slog to get to, he said, what, tier 6 yellow map? So for me, that would be like entry-level endgame content. I wouldn't even call that the real endgame. And so, frankly, you haven't even completed the base experience at 300 hours. That seems like it's just bad for bad game design. Full stop, if that's the case. So I want to see what else he has to say.
300 hours to get to the first Maven challenge. After that, I burned out. I practically skipped the Lake of Kalandra season and was going to skip the current season.
Well, that was a good choice.
Sanctum, but I didn't like that I lost any motivation to jump back into the game. Path of Exile is fun. It's tough and complicated, and most people barely get through the tutorial, but it's fun. So I decided that to get myself motivated again, it was time to make a change. This season, I followed a guide. I built a poisonous concoction pathfinder, and it opened up.
Hey, that's what iLeague started.
About 90% of what I learned on my own was covered in this build. All that trial and error, those 300 hours, made unnecessary in a single 6-step build.
And the max roll guides are fantastic. I did a couple review style type things where I made the build that was given to me on the website and then commented on how I felt about it. And max roll is fantastic. The team that they've set up there are all highly competent Path of Exile players that are, seasoned build creators and guide creators. And I imagine that for All Trades Jack, the transition between having limited knowledge or only, experiential knowledge of the process as juxtaposed with having access to the max roll guide that just lays everything out for you immediately, that had to be, I imagine that was a really eye-opening and sort of like, light bulb type moment of experience.
On my last character, getting through the campaign, through white maps into tier 6 yellow maps, took about 80 hours of play. I was fumbling around with my...
Now see, that's the amount of hours that I guess I would have expected a new player to take to get into, juicing tier 16 content. That's the assumption that I had internally, was that if they had never played the game before, I would have estimated a new person would take 60, 70 hours to level their character up and get into maps and get some gear going and whatever. And the difference here is that All Trades Jack is saying it's only with all of the community knowledge that you can even achieve that 60, 70, 80 hour experience of leveling up and getting to the end game. And that's a lot. That's a big change. 300 hours down to 80 is that's going to make a monumental difference, I would think, in the number of new players. If you took 100 people and it took them all 300 hours versus you took another 100 people and it was only going to take them 80 hours to do essentially the same thing. I wonder what the difference would be if we followed those players for a 3 or 6 month period and saw how many of them are still playing the game, how many of them are still enjoying it. I suspicion that the numbers would be astronomically higher for those who had followed a guide and were able to complete the game in a 60 to 80 hour range, which for me that is the sweet spot for an RPG, whether it's an action RPG or otherwise. And 300 hours is obscene.
Build. I was trying to get enough currency to constantly recraft my items to hit my resist caps and get more than 3,000 health. I was trying to gain enough experience to offset how much I was losing by dying all the time. Not only was building my character hard, but I had no clue how to interact with any of the extra content that could help me along the way.
I love this
What are
guy's
these
editing
splinters
style.
for? What the heck is this interrogation kill thingy, and what should I unveil? Why does this guy keep wanting me to kill pests in his garden? Without a guide, you're left to figure out all of this on your own, and I would consider most of this, with the exclusion of the side content, the base knowledge that you need to play the game. So my new experience with a guide meant that the campaign, irrelevant. It's not even part of the game really, it's basically just a tutorial and a way to get extra passive skill points. I practically cruised through the first 5 tiers of white maps with only a little bit of an adjustment to my build. I completed the last labyrinth and got my last ascendancy points. I
Oh
even
yeah.
got to the first Maven Arena challenge and beat that first try. I got a quest for the Searing Exarch. Who is that? Don't know. I didn't read the little expository paragraph about him, but I'm past level 80 and now I can start playing the game. It's at this point that I ran into new problems, ones that I had never reached before because I had burnt myself out on building a viable character. But before I get to that, I want to reiterate how different the game experience is with and without a guide. The guide itself taught me everything I needed to know on how to build a poisonous concoction pathfinder. Step by step, skill point by skill point, it told me which gems to use and which supports I needed at which time. It told me how to use aura skills and manage my mana with reservation masteries. It told me exactly what rewards to get from each quest so that I could get through the campaign.
It's easy, I guess, to forget. Not only is the skill tree insane in its scope, but they've made a lot of changes that are not intuitive at this point. The masteries, for example, if I was a new player, I don't think I would realize how important those are. And then trying to set up my own build and utilize them efficiently would have been, when I try and think in the position of somebody who does not have game knowledge, that would be really daunting. And then that's not even to start to talk about which jewels you're going to use and which, pathing and cluster jewels and all of that stuff. The complexity is really off the charts. And I get it's a played out phrase, but in a certain sense, the frog in water applies. The frog in water metaphor applies here, where there is this tendency, I guess, for a new player that on your first build, there's just a lot of mistakes that you can make in the tree, and you just don't realize how bad those mistakes are until you get to the end of the campaign and then try and get into maps and realize, oh, this isn't going to work.
The fastest. It told me when to go to the labyrinths to get my ascendancy points. Most importantly, for everything that I did, it told me why. And that's something you can't get from the game. Why do you need a 6-link body armor as fast as possible? That's pretty self-explanatory, but it's because it nearly doubles your damage output from a 4-link. Why did I get damage over time, chance to poison on hit, and attack speed nodes on the passive skill tree? Well, that's because poison scales with chaos damage over time, and can stack, meaning you want to hit fast and apply poison with every hit. Why do you want to buff your life flasks, have 2 of them, and constantly increase your ability to gain flask charges? Well, Poisonous Concoction takes charges off your life flasks in order to deal more damage. That damage scales with the amount of health recovered by the
And I'm noticing the trend now as the video progresses, I'm noticing is this is a really strong indictment of Path of Exile's in-game information transmission. The of all the things that the game does, and I know there's been podcast after podcast where Chris Wilson comes on and talks about, well, this is why we don't really focus on the help menu and blah blah blah. But the reality is there's not even pop-ups that come on the screen and tell you this basic information about whatever build it is that you're playing. Surely they could come up with some way to give you more information about the skill you're using, because I wouldn't have thought that this was the case, but I bet there are folks that are leveling up through the campaign trying Poisonous Concoction and play most of the game literally not understanding the basic mechanics that govern that skill's use. And this is bad for in terms of game design. And I mean, again, we know that this is the case. None of this is groundbreaking new information for seasoned Path of Exile players, but for me, it's hitting home in a different way to hear someone that is not, a multi-year player of the game, sort of sharing it in this way. The way that he's presenting it to me is hitting me in a way that is more prescient.
By the flask, so you want to have a flask that can heal as much as possible and uses the least amount of charges so you don't get caught unable to heal yourself. Yes, you can figure this out in the game using the descriptions that GGG gives you, but when you are learning as you go, it could take years to optimize the 400 node skill tree to hit mana reservation, chaos damage, poison on hit, shield mastery, life, leech, and onslaught nodes all at once, using the most efficient path to get there. It could take years to figure out that you can have 3 different auras, 2 different poison and 3 different hex application methods, an absorption shield, a shield charge for movement, and an enrage buff, all that work together to create this perfect mix of offensive and defensive qualities. I wouldn't even have put 2 and 2 together and thought, hey, you know what would be a good build? If I threw away my weapon and decided to huck bottles of poison at my enemies from behind a massive shield. This is
True.
called optimization, and it's something that usually takes a level of understanding beyond that of a normal person. I've said it before in my other videos, but people who make build guides are brilliant. The level of game intelligence it must take to figure out all of this stuff to an extent that you can optimize it and make it efficient to play is insane. And you know what's even crazier? Even after reading this build guide and being directed on how to engage with character building, there is still about 50% of the game that I have no clue about. I still don't know who the Searing Exarch is.
Wow, that's a really powerful sentence. In fact, let's roll that back.
Make it efficient to play is insane. And you know what's even crazier? Even after reading this build guide and being directed on how to engage with character building, there is still about 50% of the game that I have no clue about. I still don't know who the Searing Exarch.
So, All Trades Jack played 300 hours on his own trying to level this character up. He then accessed a guide written by some of the best players in the game, knowledgeable folks that have been playing for many years, and it still took him 80 hours to get into the end game. And he's telling you that even essentially with an expert guiding him step by step, he's still in the dark about half of the game. Imagine if you were taking an English class and I assigned you a book and you went home and you tried to read the book and you just couldn't get anything out of it. So you came into office hours and I walked you through, this is here are the themes and blah, 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 blah. We go through everything. I walk you through page by page. I start highlighting stuff in your book. I send you home, you read the whole book, and then you come in the next week and you still don't know half of the shit that you're supposed to know. That would be an indictment on me as an educator, not on you as a reader at that point. And I feel like that last sentence that he just uttered there is one of the strongest condemnations of the way that the Path of Exile developers have approached the new game, the new player experience rather, that I have ever heard. I think that is absolutely striking, that somebody could have access to all of these resources and have played what, a total of almost 400 hours in the game, and still literally not know who the boss of the game is. Absolutely fucking wild.
Dark is, or how his influence on certain map tiers affects me. I've beat the Maven challenge 3 times, but I don't know what these Maven challenge recipes are on the map device. I just got the Eater of Worlds quests, and I have no clue what he or she does. I have just barely understood the altars that pop up in your maps that you can spend points on to get extra rewards. It's such a weird feeling to have followed a guide and still be a beginner. But I guess that's what really cements it for me. Most people say that new players should follow a guide on their first playthrough, and after seeing how the game is when playing without a build guide, in contrast to how the game is when playing with a build guide, my advice is this. Do you want to have fun exploring the campaign and building characters that fit your fantasy? Or do you want to play Path of Exile? In all seriousness, if you have any intention of getting a character past white maps in the endgame, you should follow a build for your first time. It's not that I don't like learning on my own through trial and error, but trust me when I say that there is so much more to learn even while following a guide. A guide just allows you to get to the point where you can see any of this endgame content.
It really does seem like, based on what he's saying here, that almost you should probably be following a guide for many characters, not just your first one. If you follow a guide, it still takes you 80 hours to get to the end game, and you're not in the know about fundamental parts of the game. Who is the Searing Exarch? What is a scarab? So on and so forth. I would recommend to most people that unless the thing that you enjoy is trying to make up a build, then probably you should just be following guides in perpetuity. Unless they make some kind of massive changes to the way that information is transmitted from developer to new player. On your second character, if you're playing a different archetype than the first one, I mean, granted, if you just make the same character again, you might not need to follow the guide as closely the second time, but he did a poisonous concoction character. If the next time he wants to do, I don't know, a bow build or something like that, there's no guarantee that the knowledge that you gained from that first experience is going to carry you through on a build that's going to need different interactions. And I loved the bit where he was talking about that it might take years to figure out all the different interactions between auras and buffs and things like that. I still don't know all of that stuff. And even when I'm going to make a build guide, and of course, normally I don't invent my builds. I'm not creating builds from scratch almost ever. I've done, I think, 1 or 2 such builds in the time that I've been making content. 99% of the time, what I'm doing is either taking a build that is well established in the community, but that doesn't have a huge number of guides on it that are recent, or I'm taking a build that is just underplayed, but there is adequate resources available online already to get the thing going. And then I make significant changes to it based on my knowledge and player experience. And a lot of times I'm just sharing, hey, this is the way that I built this character that lots of other people have built. Maybe give it a try my way. The idea of actually going in and just making a build from scratch where maybe you're just only saying, I want to play, I don't know, I want to play Fireball. And so I'm just going to make a build up around that. I wonder how long it would take. That would be an interesting follow-up video to see from All Trades Jack, maybe in a year or in 2 years or something, would be how long does it take to go from it takes me 80 hours with a guide to get into maps to I made up my own build with no help from anybody else and I got into farming tier 16 content. My guess is that given what he said so far, the hill that you'd have to climb to get there is probably just not worth it for most people. And I think that's the big takeaway that I'm getting so far from this video is he's not saying it that way. I don't want to put words into his mouth. What I'm saying is my reaction is it just doesn't seem like the level of effort that would be required for a new player to get to the level where they could just make up a build and have it be successful. It just doesn't seem like a good return on the investment of your time. You may as well just make the decision at the beginning, right? Either you're happy to follow guides and engage with the, existing Path of Exile community, or maybe the better option is to consider whether or not another game would be a better fit for you, one where the developers are more skilled at creating edifices within the game that transmit knowledge to the new player.
Even with a guide, I haven't been able to get to tier 16 maps yet. I'm sure I can, but I've spent around 90 hours on this character, and I'm raiding in WoW, and I'm playing more games for upcoming reviews, and I'm trying to get back into rugby shape. If the season ends and I haven't made it to tier 16 maps, well, standard will have to do.
All right, so he hasn't even stepped foot into the real end game. He's never actually played Path of Exile, in my view, or at least like he's never played it to the point. All the stuff that he's described, 400 hours plus. That's all the stuff that I don't enjoy. That's the shit that I just do because I can't get to the tasty map blasting unless I do this shit. And so it makes me a little bit sad because he seems like a really thoughtful and interesting guy that it would be, I would love to see his impressions of, end game farming strategies and how does he fare against, Uber bosses and stuff like that. How difficult, because obviously if he's raiding in WoW and he's playing all these other games, his channel is pretty successful. And so I assume we're not talking about player competence here. This is an issue with Path of Exile, not with the player. And so it's sad. It bums me out that even if you take somebody who is ostensibly, I assume he's doing this content for a living at this point, that the actual fun part of the game, in my view, is still inaccessible to him. It's not achievable for him, even with the help of the established, expert community, particularly the guys writing the amazing guides over on Maxroll.
There are definitely upsides and downsides to following a guide. Path of Exile is just such a huge game that without a guide, there's a very, very low chance that a new player will ever experience the later half of it. So really, I'll say this again and again because it bears repeating, the question comes down to, what is your goal in Path of Exile? Now that I've been on both sides of this debate, I don't think following a guide is as harmful as I expected to the idea of exploration and experiencing the fun of learning on your own. It feels kind of like a graduation. Now that you've gone through the work to learn how to build a semi-viable character, here's a guide you can follow so you don't have to worry about that anymore and move on to more complicated things. Before I had a guide, I was learning and playing the base game. How do the base mechanics and stats work with a character? All my trial and error, all that exploration of what works and what different skills do, what armor works best for what type of build, all of that could be summed up as the first 20% of the game.
Now, one thing that I think is interesting here is I do not think that a lot of people view Path of Exile as a game that you would liken unto chess or any other highly complex strategy-based game with a history of expert folks really delving into strategy and so on and so forth. So for example, if I wanted to get into chess, you just wouldn't do that without some kind of instruction. You would want to be part of a chess club, or you would want to be taking lessons. If you wanted to really seriously become, an avid chess player, maybe even compete, you don't just smash your face into the game for hundreds of hours with no outside information and expect that you're going to be able to, compete against folks who've been training. And Path of Exile is a game that requires training, so to speak. It requires you to be willing to engage with the data, to engage with the numbers, with the established knowledge base that is being created by not the game developers, but by other folks who have years and years of experience figuring out what works and what does not work. In the same way that you couldn't expect somebody who's never played chess before to figure out some specific strategy for winning in X number of moves or whatever. I'm not a chess player. I'm just kind of making this shit up as I go here. But chess was just the first thing that came to mind. But let's take this to guitar, for example. There's always this debate that rages in the guitar community about, should you take lessons or should you not? Should you study music theory or should you not? And yes, there is the possibility that you can, having never seen anyone play a guitar, having never heard the instrument before, that you could just sit in a room for 5 years by yourself. And when you emerged, some of what you would be doing would be innovative, interesting, and different from the general, and that you would be able to learn a great deal on your own. But I think that much like Path of Exile, I have found that guitar is a thing where a great deal of the benefit, a great deal of your growth as a musician comes from the interactions that you have with other practitioners. Whether that's, taking private guitar lessons from somebody who's already figured out that, hey, you should be using this part of the finger and not this other part, or this is the way that you should hold the pick, not this other way. And there are folks who they just enjoy the punishment of not knowing any of those things, and then they get a massive endorphin release when they discover something 2, 3, 4 years down the road that I discovered day two when my guitar instructor just said, bro, hold the pick this way. And part of the problem is that if you spend your entire life not knowing anything about any of the stuff that you're doing, and you don't engage with the people around you, the, in literature we would say the greats upon whose shoulders you stand, the result is that often you end up not ever getting to utilize those more basic elements to, create your own voice. And in the same way with Path of Exile, yes, it's true that if you follow a guide, you are sort of shutting yourself out from the initial experience of discovery in terms of going in completely knowledgeless and figuring out on your own that this is how a skill gem works, and this is the, organization that I'd need to use on my skill tree. This is the correct way to path. This is which bosses I should be farming. This is how I get into maps, all of these things. It does shut you off from that to some degree, but I think that it's a mistake to think that just because you follow a guide to get to the end game, that there is no room after that point to make those exact same types of discoveries. And as is true in guitar, so is true in Path of Exile. You benefit from learning all of that basic information: how to hold the pick, that you need a six link, this is how you play a chord, this is how you, set up your auras, this is how you sweep pick, this is how you get into red tier maps. And then at that point, with that knowledge base, that's where you can really start to define your own voice on the instrument or your own style of play in the game. And again, I just think it's kind of tragic that somebody that seems to be so passionate about the game, and so such an interesting person that has a lot of really insightful things to say, that they're not actually, they haven't even played a build yet. They haven't even done the thing yet. And I feel like this is immensely interesting, and it also highlights the degree to which, as content creators and as veteran players, we just don't know what new players don't know, to a degree that is in any other pedagogical arena. This same degree of disparity between the person who's trying to teach information to someone else and the actual knowledge level of the person being taught. In literature and in guitar, we have a much better idea of what the student is not going to know. And I don't want to speak for other content creators, but listening to All Trades Jack talk here, I'm realizing that I was assuming that newer players knew a shitload more about the game than they actually do. And that's my fault. That's on me as a content creator and as an educator, to reevaluate that position and try and compensate for that. And so I can already tell you that just from watching this guy's video, I'm going to be making some changes to the way that I present information on my channel going forward in future leagues, as far as what types of things I'm going to be making. It seems like there might be a lot more room in the space for guide type content that I just haven't made because I thought, well, this is just rudimentary. This is stuff that, they're going to Google it real fast and they're just going to be good to go, right? But that is not the case. And that's again, that's on me, and my presuppositions about the amount of knowledge that the game is giving to new players, because I forget that I've been doing this. I've only been making content for a year, but I've been playing the game essentially since I first heard about it. I think it was in beta. And I did not play seriously. It was, I played for a week here and then I'd wait a year, I'd try it again, wait a couple years, try it again. But it's easy to forget all of the little pieces of knowledge that stick that I acquired through all of those, years of play. And then on top of that, I didn't enter the game initially when there was nearly as much content as there is now. And so to some degree, I was able to sort of stepladder my way up as it went, because they were adding these things incrementally. To come in now and be faced with harvest and ritual and metamorph and all of these other mechanics, and then there's mapping, and then there's farming strategies, and there's currency that you have to try and farm. What gear do you need to buy? How do you set your build up? Oh, I'm like, holy shit, I didn't realize how much of this stuff had just become second nature, essentially like brain motor memory, solidified knowledge. Absolutely crazy.
So then I followed a guide. I spent 10 minutes reading through it and learning what the different terminology was. I learned what it was asking me to do and when, and now I can play the rest of the 80%. And let me tell you, just because I'm following a build now doesn't mean I'm good at the game or can make this unbelievably unbeatable character. The Poisonous Concoction build has weaknesses, and it's up to me to be able to alter my armor and gameplay to make up for those weaknesses. I still need to know how to craft and use currency correctly and a bunch more things. I'm still constantly learning new things as I play, things that a build guide doesn't outright tell you. It just gives a foundation on which I can start playing the game, a foundation that is almost a necessity. Once you get to these higher levels, the game is extremely hectic. I'll just come right out and say it. I don't even see my character anymore. I just see a bunch of pretty flashing colors and moving blurs on the screen when things die around me. There is no
That is absolutely true. And speaking of somebody that's visually disabled, I can barely see the shit on the screen, if I'm playing fucking Minesweeper. But playing Path of Exile, I just bump up the size of the cursor, and the part of the game where I'm making sure I can read shit and see what's going on, that's the part where I'm picking the gear and setting the character up. Once I'm blasting in a map, it's just pretty colors, man. I'm just fucking rolling through. And so he's spot on here.
discernible gameplay other than to move as much as possible and do enough damage that you can kill things before they overwhelm you. Plenty of times I've gotten to the point where there are just so many things on the screen and so many calculations happening at once that my computer almost explodes. And
That's the good
shit.
shit.
For the most part, it just sort of amplifies a couple of the problems that I had before. I'm still confused as to why I die, but now it just happens faster and there are more factors affecting my death. I'm still confused as to how some of the buffs and debuffs on monsters work, but now every map has a much longer list of monsters.
Yeah, I hate to break this part, but most of the time I don't think anybody knows exactly why they die unless it's really obvious. I mean, most of the time, even hyper seasoned streamers, if they die, they have to go back and you fucking play the video back to try and figure out, okay, well, this must have been what killed me. Sometimes you can figure it out, to a 95%, level of surety. Is that a word? Surety? It is now. But for the most part, you're not going to know exactly what killed you. Was it a physical hit? Was it some elemental damage? Was it this or that? For the average player, even someone that's seasoned, really the only information that you're going to get is that you died. And so it becomes more a battle of trying to make sure that your defensive suite is sufficient to eliminate most of the occurrences where you're going to die. And for me, at least, that's been about the best that you can do.
Monster changing attributes. But with the foundation that the guide has given me, I feel much more prepared to learn these things on my own. Maybe for a little while anyway, before I go look it up on the wiki. One guide later, and my understanding of the game has far exceeded that of last season. And like I said, if I had more time in my life, I could keep progressing. I know I'm not that far from tier 16 maps. There are more passive skill points that I want to spend on my guy to make him even stronger, and I really, really want to be an endgame boss. I did actually beat this one boss that shows up in the Abyssal Depths. That was extremely fun, so it makes me want to see how awesome the other fights are. Watching my gameplay back, I feel like it would be so confusing to anyone starting the game. That's how I was when I first started. I would look at gameplay like this and be like, what the actual fuck is going on? And now, after having played for over 400 hours, my only critique for Path of Exile is that it's hostile to new players, your CPU, and potentially light or color sensitive people. And to you, my dear viewers, my only question to you this time is, any suggestions for my next build? But most importantly, I hope you enjoy the video. Making Path of Exile videos is extremely time consuming, but it's definitely the series that I enjoy the most. I appreciate you all for watching. Remember to leave a like and comment, and sub if you haven't already. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Sanctum League, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.
All right, what a fantastic video. I enjoyed the shit out of that. Lots of really good stuff to think about, and especially that end point where he says the game is hostile to new players, your CPU, and photosensitive players. It couldn't be more true. Now, I have to say, the CPU thing, that's part of the fun. It's fun to blow up a whole screen of mobs and see exactly what happens to your poor computer when you do that. But those other two things, the hostility to new players and the hostility to those with photosensitive issues, I think are things that continue to compound. And I have not seen a whole lot of evidence that this is a thing that's going to change in Path of Exile 2. And I'll be interested to see if they try and address this, how they go about doing it. And man, I would really like to see All Trades Jack go a little bit further and get into those tier 16 maps. Maybe with a build that's a little bit more powerful, a little bit easier to scale than Poisonous Concoction, and see what he has to say at that juncture. But I'm gonna let you guys take off. I know this has gone on a little bit long, and if you did stick around listening to me ramble this entire time, I do appreciate it. I don't know if I will be doing a lot of reaction content as a staple on the channel, though I do enjoy, I like the sense of community that I think it creates when content creators productively and respectfully view each other's content and discuss the points that they make. I enjoy watching that content, and I'm enjoying making it. But in any event, I don't know if this is something I'll be doing super often. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see more stuff like this from me. Otherwise, I will see you guys in the next video. Appreciate you.